Lady Audley's Secret is a splendid romp of a read. It starts by introducing the reader to lovely Lucy, the picture of perfect beauty, newly enthroned as Lady Audley at Audley Court. The second chapter switches to scenes on board a ship returning from Australia. George Talboys is on board, has made his fortune gold digging, and is eager to return to the beautiful wife he has left behind. As the novel continues, the reader quickly suspects that lovely Lucy may have a terribly dark secret, and that actually she may be the person George Talboys married. Fortunately, lazy, languid, so-called barrister Robert Audley finds himself doing something for the first time in his life, and is forced to pursue his suspicions to their dramatic, shocking conclusion, thus shattering the hopes and dreams of his noble uncle, Sir Michael.
The aim of this video is to increase or consolidate your understanding of three key areas of Mary Elizabeth Braddon's Lady Audley's Secret. Firstly, the theme of madness. Secondly, the presentation of women. Thirdly, the theme of fate. The majority of the video will use slides containing the coloured theme at the top, a precise point relating to the theme below in blue, and then relevant quotations with page numbers from the 2012 Oxford World's Classics edition.
Keen to increase your chances of an outstanding final academic grade? Prepare to put the time in to think more deeply, take the occasional notes, and develop your ideas by scrutinising sections of the novel in far more detail? Well, this A-level pre-U revision guide to Lady Audley's Secret will help you do just that.
Stay tuned, you're watching Schofield and Shakespeare.
Madness is a key theme in the novel. Lady Audley, the novel's heroine cum villain, first seen as the personification of bewitching blessed beauty, is later uncovered by her nemesis, Robert Audley, to have committed bigamy and attempted murder. During a final confrontation in Volume 3, Chapter 3, My Lady Tells the Truth, Lady Audley finally admits to her crime, but admits them dramatically to her madness. She confesses, "When you say that I killed George Talboys, you say the truth. When you say that I murdered him treacherously and foully, you lie. I killed him because I am mad." Consequently, she is carted off to a maison de santé, which Lady Audley quite rightly identifies as sounding less sinister than the reality due to the deceptively civilised-sounding French translation of the English term madhouse in Belgium, before conveniently dying a few years later, freeing up everyone else to resume their lives with reducing loom shadows.
But Braddon's treatment and references to madness are interesting and suggest an ambiguous, frequently empathetic attitude to those suffering from mental turmoil, some of whom society attempts to brand oversimplistically as mad. Frequently during the novel, the narrator steps back from the story to reflect on attitudes towards madness. In Volume 2, Chapter 6, George's Letters, the narrator writes this: "Madhouses are large and only too numerous. Yet surely it is strange they are not larger, when we think of how many helpless wretches must beat their brains against this hopeless persistency of the orderly outward world, as compared with the storm and tempest, the riot and confusion within. When we remember how many minds must tremble upon the narrow boundary between reason and unreason, mad today and sane tomorrow, mad yesterday and sane today." The implication here is that the margin between madness and sanity is much smaller than popular opinion would like us to believe. Madness can be a temporary condition, and many of us can oscillate between comparative mental ease and tempestuous mental strife on a day-to-day basis, due to the natural tendency of minds to be far more changeable and chaotic than the appearance of ordered society with all its unspoken rules and regulations. These words surely contain an implicit, gentle rebuke towards a society which insists upon such a sharp divide between the sane, free to build their lives within society, and the so-called mad, locked up in madhouses and viewed stereotypically and by the young Helen Talboys as raving, straight-waistcoated maniacs guarded by zealous gaolers. Such a binary "we are either sane or insane" divide shows a lack of understanding of the far more fluid nature of mental difficulties, a point the narrator comes back to towards the end of the novel in Volume 3, Chapter 7, Ghost Haunted. She refers to the intellectual novelist and essayist Samuel Johnson, and vividly describes his mental breakdown. Who can forget that almost terrible picture of Dr. Samuel Johnson, the awful disputant of the clubroom, solemn, ponderous, severe and merciless, the admiration and the terror of humble Bozzy, the stern monitor of gentle Oliver, the friend of Garrick and Reynolds tonight, and before sunset tomorrow a weak, miserable old man, discovered by good Mr. and Mrs. Thrale, kneeling upon the floor of his lonely chamber in an agony of childish terror and confusion, and praying to a merciful God for the preservation of his wits. Who has not been, or is not to be, mad in some lonely hour of life? Who is quite safe from the trembling of the balance? So when sane, Johnson could hold forth brilliantly amongst fellow authors and the finest minds of his generation. Yet he was found utterly terrified and confused on the floor, desperately praying to God not to be struck down by madness. The narrator's implication is that if such a great mind can suffer mental breakdown or turmoil, then by God it can potentially happen to all of us. The phrase "trembling of the balance" implies just how insecure our grip on good, solid, perfect mental order is. Just one unexpected misfortune can potentially result in our mental equilibriums being toppled and all of us experiencing a degree of madness. So what do we mean when we use the word mad? On the one hand, it can imply mentally deranged behaviour that, in Lady Audley's case, results in impulses to subvert society's sacred rules and endanger the lives of others. But the same word can also be used more loosely in a more throwaway context as very foolish. In Volume 2, Chapter 12, Preparing the Ground, Lady Audley explains to her husband that his nephew has decided to stay at a run-down local pub in the middle of nowhere, rather than stay with his family in his usual rooms at Audley Court. Of course, the reasons for this is so that he can question the pub landlord further, who is aware of Lady Audley's secret past, and because he doesn't want to speak to his uncle whilst he is engaged in such a ferocious battle over truth with his wife. Of course, Sir Michael Audley doesn't know this, and therefore the thought of his nephew sleeping at this random, uncomfortable pub just seems half mad. This is merely a throwaway everyday remark, expressing temporary frustration at behaviour he considers puzzling or doesn't understand. Yet the fact the word mad could also mean serious mental disorders helps present a potential opportunity for Lady Audley. For in Lady Audley's Secret, as well as Wilkie Collins's The Woman in White, serialised just 3 years previously in 1859, accusations of madness can be stunning tools which can be used to try to silence others intent on uncovering your own secrets. In The Woman in White, Sir Percival Glyde can use the mental health system to lock up first Anne Catherick and then, remarkably, his own wife passed off as Anne Catherick. And here, Lady Audley is able to use her husband's use of the word mad in a far more light-hearted context to introduce a far more serious exploration of his nephew's mental well-being, something she has repeatedly threatened during her exchanges with Robert. And of course the context is important here. Whereas nowadays we would be very unlikely to use such a simplistic, emotive term as mad to describe someone with significant mental health difficulties, and such people would only be locked away for life if they had already committed the most heinous of crimes, for example, the Yorkshire Ripper. In the 19th century context of the novel, the far more simplistic attitude towards mental health decreed that mad meant dangerous and must be locked away immediately, which Braddon seeks to challenge. The novel implies that society could offer no shades of treatment or interpretation for those deemed mad, but just as Lady Audley threatens her accuser Robert Audley in the extract on screen lifelong imprisonment of a private lunatic asylum. The extent to which an accusation of madness can be a potent weapon is emphasised by Lady Audley's words at the end of Volume 2, Chapter 12, Preparing the Ground. Following her conversation with her husband, in which she has partly revealed Robert Audley's extraordinary sounding suspicions about her and her subsequent speculations about his mental health, her confidence both in herself as a role player and in the terrified way society deals with those felt to be mad has clearly risen. If someone can sustain and follow through with accusations of madness, even if in their heart of hearts the accuser secretly considers themselves susceptible to madness and knows the accused is sanely telling the full truth, they can win for themselves freedom from attack and a life of degrading, stifling, dehumanizing imprisonment for their enemy. But simply, if you can get in there quickly and convince people that the other person is mad before that person can do the same about you, you may be just fine. A modern reader more tuned in to the nuances of mental health issues is likely to conclude that a sustained accusation of madness within the 19th century world painted in Lady Audley's Secret could have terrifyingly disastrous consequences.
So far in this video, I have suggested that the novel argues against an oversimplistic view of madness, in which we are subdivided into two discrete categories: permanently mad and permanently sane, and the consequence of society sanctioning such simplicity, namely that an accusation of madness could chillingly result in a lifetime in a mental asylum. However, in her portrayal of Lady Audley, or Helen Talboys, or however you would like to call her, Braddon makes the reader think more deeply about our own definitions of madness and the relationship between madness and evil. On the one hand, the Doctor states that Lady Audley isn't mad. However, he then refers to the fact that her mother is mad, even though he has earlier stressed that madness is not necessarily transmitted from mother to daughter, to help him conclude more ambiguously that she has the cunning of madness with the prudence of intelligence and thus is highly dangerous. In other words, Lady Audley is more dangerous because she is not fully mad and can pick and choose the attributes she needs from madness, cunning and sanity, intelligence, in order to help her achieve utterly ruthless objectives. The conclusion is that this creature, who doesn't quite fit into society's either mad or sane system, must be urgently grouped with the former, the mad, and treated accordingly.
And I deliberately aim to use the word treated with a healthy dose of cynicism, as the novel implies that mental asylums were seen primarily as a means of protecting society, rather than places for the mentally troubled to receive genuinely useful and rejuvenating treatment. With the extract on screen, Dr. Musgrave's comparison of living as a patient at the Villebrumeur's Maison de Santé with being buried alive in a grave suggests that mental patients feel unbearably claustrophobic, confined, close to death, and suffocated by lack of fresh air and positive human contact. And this is backed up by Lady Audley's words soon after arriving there. She declares that she has been brought to my grave, a living grave. Clearly, the imagery of being buried alive suggests that inmates have no opportunity to experience positive mental growth, and that the future will consist of immobile, slow, mind-numbing mental and physical decay. Those declared mad or plonked into that simplistic category essentially become non-humans. To live such lives would be a living hell from which death would be a welcome release.
So whilst Braddon presents a frequently sympathetic view of mental illness, in her portrayal of Lady Audley, she shows how evil, or streaks of madness, or both, can result in animalistic, savage behaviour, which society can only control by locking away and denying basic humanity. Let's now move on to her presentation of women, which will also give further insight into Lady Audley's character and behaviour. Chapter 6, George's Letters from Volume 2, contains some interesting extended ruminations from Robert Audley about women, which are worth exploring.
In the extract on screen, Robert suggests that women have boundless energy for what he considers the largely pointless potential targets of life. In a vivid, relentless list of verbs, he declares that women, instead of supporting life as an unavoidable nuisance, only redeemable by its brevity, she goes through it as if it were a pageant or a procession. She dresses for it and simpers and grins and gesticulates for it. She pushes her neighbours and struggles for a good place in the dismal march. She elbows and writhes and tramples and prances to the one end of making the most of the misery. The loaded verbs, women simper, writhe, trample, prance, suggest that women have zest and ambition for making the most of life, potentially at the expense of others. Yet the paucity of employment opportunities for women during this period meant that such energy often had to be expanded upon husbands. The consequences of this? The husband can end up being pushed into doing something he is wholly unsuited for, and, implicitly, the woman's desires for fulfillment and achievement can only be achieved by proxy via a man. Another hint that women's sphere of influence may be unhelpfully restricted to the domestic is seen in the subsequent chapter, Retrograde Investigation, when the narrator describes Lady Audley making tea. This is well worth reading out in full. Surely a pretty woman never looks prettier than when making tea. The most feminine and most domestic of all occupations imparts a magic harmony to her every movement, a witchery to her every glance. The floating mists from the boiling liquid in which she infuses the soothing herbs, whose secrets are known to her alone, envelop her in a cloud of scented vapour, through which she seems a social fairy, weaving potent spells with gunpowder and bahia. At the tea table she reigns omnipotent, unapproachable. What do men know of the mysterious beverage? In this extract, Braddon talks of the tea-making process granting the female a magic harmony to every movement, transforming her into a social fairy, able to weave potent spells. Such supernatural imagery hilariously jars with the mundanity of making bloody tea, and thus implies colloquially that Braddon is taking the mick. The overall effect is to satirise society's delight in women looking pretty doing mundane tasks and little else, and imply subversively that the delegation of roles and tasks for men and women may be unequal and restrictive. The novel may contain hints about women's opportunities being restricted, but it also illustrates how women can be unhelpfully ultra-competitive and vindictive towards each other. In Volume 2, Chapter 8, So Far and No Further, Robert Audley reflects on a teacher, Miss Tonks, and her apparent desire to be as helpful as possible to give information that may harm Lady Audley. He muses, how pitiless these women are to each other. This one knows intuitively that there is some danger to the other lurking beneath my questions. She sniffs the coming trouble to her fellow female creature and rejoices in it, and would take any pains to help me. The use of the verb sniff implies that one woman is keen to use the full range of her senses and wits in order to anticipate the potential for another disliked woman to be spited. Robert Audley continues to reflect on gender issues in the subsequent chapter when he considers the process by which men and women get to know each other and get married. The trouble is, of course, that both parties don't really know each other before marriage, and this can have disastrous consequences, as is the case for poor George Talboys. Referring to the seaport at Wildernsea and understandably adopting a male perspective, he declares that such a place works a strong man's ruin. He comes here, heart whole and happy, with no better experience of woman than is to be learnt at a flower show or in a ballroom, with no more familiar knowledge of the creature than he has of the far-away satellites of the remoter planets, with a vague notion that she is a whirling teetotum in pink or blue gauze, or a graceful automaton for the display of milliner's manufacture. The faraway creatures whom he had seen floating about him, beautiful and indistinct, are brought under his very nose. The witchcraft has begun. The victim is as powerless to escape as the marble-legged prince in the Eastern story. Robert Audley's comparison of men's understanding of women with his knowledge of far-away satellites of the remoter planets suggests that they have no idea whatsoever what women are like.
Our understanding of the mysteries of planet Earth are limited enough. What do we know about natural bodies that revolve around planets that we can only dimly and very rarely see in the distance? His imagery implies that men become aware of the rapid, colourful way in which women move, dance perhaps, like small finger-spinning tops, teetotums, and that their hats are elegant. However, both the metaphor of teetotum and the use of the word automaton imply that the men are seeing the women purely in terms of their physical appearance, and have not gleaned any insight into how they are as thinking human beings. Meanwhile, the reference to witchcraft and the man becoming a victim suggests that men become so entranced by this physical apparition that they end up falling in love with these beautiful images and movements without knowing the person underneath. To return to George Talboys, who fell in love with Helen Talboys in this spot, if he had had a better understanding of the person underneath, would he have married her so quickly and so besottedly? Or perhaps, could a society which facilitates men and women genuinely understanding each other before marriage have led to him finding out about her fatal, self-declared secret of a propensity to madness-induced impulsivity? Either way, better knowledge of a partner can only ever result in a more mature, fulfilling relationship. And to return to Lady Audley, is there an argument that although her beauty bewitched, ultimately it was a terrible curse? In Volume 2, Chapter 13, Phoebe's Petition, the narrator speculates that Lady Audley may have felt that her beauty was so powerful and all-encompassing that any other character deficiencies simply didn't matter, resulting in her becoming selfish and cruel, indifferent to the joys and sorrows of others, cold-hearted and capricious, greedy of admiration, exacting and tyrannical, with that petty woman's tyranny which is the worst of despotisms. The use of personification to describe the three demons of vanity, selfishness, and ambition becoming her rulers suggests that Lady Audley's obsessive narcissism resulted in her losing control of herself and her moral compass. In fact, it left her more prone to madness, as her reliance on her beauty gave her the confidence to risk outrageous acts, such as marrying bigamously, which would ultimately result in madness-inducing confrontation or goading. In her portrayal of Lady Audley, Braddon illustrates the fact that those females who are beautiful can choose to ruthlessly use their bewitching charms to achieve higher social positions and freedom from pecuniary struggles. Yet their belief in their beauty may result in the development of moral qualities being bludgeoned. Paradoxically, Braddon suggests that society may misguidedly associate beautiful, angelic-appearing women with goodness, and in Volume 2, Chapter 11, in The Line Walk, Robert Audley reflects on just how dangerous this is. Are women merciful or loving or kind in proportion to their beauty and their grace? Was there not a certain Monsieur Mazars de la Tour who had the bad fortune to offend the all-accomplished Madame de Pompadour, who expiated his useful indiscretion by a lifelong imprisonment, who twice escaped from prison to be twice cast back into captivity, who, trusting in the tardy generosity of his beautiful foe, betrayed himself to an implacable fiend? The historical reference to a man who felt that a beautiful woman was bound to forgive him for sending her a letter bomb himself before fraudulently claiming that there was a plot against her life in the hope of gaining a financial reward, but most certainly didn't, illustrates that the beautiful can be as ruthless and hard-nosed as any of us. Indeed, the phrase implacable fiend dehumanizes this particular beautiful woman from history and aligns her with evil spirits rather than the stereotypical angels that so many men are inclined to label whirling teetotums. Thus, this example emphatically answers the rhetorical question about whether women are merciful, loving, and kind in relation to their beauty and grace. They are not. So Braddon attacks the notion of beautiful women being disproportionately hero-worshipped, and shows the pitfalls of these women depending so ruthlessly on their physical appearance. But of course, the structures and conventions within society make it understandable, especially for the modern reader, that a woman may want to maximise the returns from virtually her only trump card. In Volume 3, Chapter 3, My Lady Tells the Truth, Lady Audley talks of the effects of being told constantly about her beauty, which made her begin to think that, in spite of the secret of my life, I might be more successful in the world's great lottery than my companions. I learnt that which in some indefinite manner or other every schoolgirl learns sooner or later. I learnt that my ultimate fate in life depended upon my marriage, and I concluded that if I was indeed prettier than my schoolfellows, I ought to marry better than any of them. The phrase which really stands out here is the world's great lottery. This doesn't refer to Euro Millions or Lotto, but life, and stresses that success in life for women relates purely to luck and chance. Additionally, just as winning a lottery is extremely unlikely, so being very successful in life is only going to happen to the very luckiest. Of course, this is curiously depressing, as it negates the possibility of hard work, moral goodness, use of intelligence, etc., to achieve success in life. It is all down to luck, whether you can ensnare a man with a stomping fortune to marry you. So, could we argue that Lady Audley is, in fact, a victim of society's A. shallow obsession with female beauty, B. insistence on women following the narrowest of paths in life? How different would her life have been within our modern society, which of course isn't obsessed in any way with looks, although women do have far more opportunities to thrive independently of men.
In the final section of this video, I'd like to briefly explore the theme of fate. One feature which makes the novel so powerful is the fact that Lady Audley's nemesis, Robert Audley, has enormous reservations about exposing his uncle's wife's evil. He loves and respects his uncle and is loath to do anything which would cause him pain, let alone the enormous shock and shame of realising that he has married a woman bigamously and that there is a dark, sinister side to this woman, which he had no idea existed. However, repeatedly in the novel, Robert Audley feels compelled to seek out justice and expose the truth by a force which seems to counteract his own reluctance.
In Volume 2, Chapter 10, Hidden in the Grave, Robert Audley has time to kill and ends up ambling into Audley Church, attracted by surprisingly well executed organ music. Astonishingly, the musician is none other than his lost friend George Talboys' sister, Clara. He wonders that the sister of his lost friend should be here playing the organ, here where she could watch his every action, and from those actions deduce the secret workings of his mind, tracing his doubts home to their object, made a complication of his difficulties that he could never have anticipated. It brought him back to that consciousness of his own helplessness in which he had exclaimed, "A hand that is stronger than my own is beckoning me onward on the dark road that leads to my lost friend's unknown grave." The presence of Clara is therefore for Robert far more than just an extraordinary coincidence, but a sign, a vigorous message from an external force that he must continue his investigations onwards to find out exactly what happened to his old friends. So the strong hand of fate compels moral justice, something Robert clearly feels strongly in, as shown in the same chapter when he hectors Lady Audley for forgetting that there is a providence above the pitiful speculators, and that wicked secrets are never permitted to remain long hidden. These words reveal a belief in an ordered universe in which right and wrong will ultimately prevail, irrespective of the plotting and machinations of insignificant little human beings, including the dazzlingly beautiful. Towards the very end of the novel, Audley is more specific about what propels humans to act with moral courage and ensures wickedness ultimately cannot thrive. From the hand stronger than his own, from providence, he talks specifically of a Christian God in the extract on screen. His sin has recoiled upon his own head, for had my lady's mind been set at ease, the castle inn would not have been burnt down. Who shall dare to try and order his own life after this? Who can fail to recognise God's hand in this strange story? The context is that Luke Marks is on his deathbed and is asked to see Robert Audley. He reveals that he and his hopelessly forgetful mother were the only people to find out that George Talboys escaped alive, albeit badly injured, from the old well within the grounds of Audley Court. Even more pertinently, George gave him 2 letters to pass on, one to Lady Audley and one to Robert.
If Luke Marks had done the right thing and passed on these letters, then Lady Audley's mind would have been set at ease. She would both know that she hadn't committed murder and that her husband had agreed never to bother her again. The consequences of this would have been that Lady Audley wouldn't have needed or felt the urge to set fire to the Castle Inn, an act which would ultimately cause Luke's death. The implication of the final rhetorical question on screen about God's hand is to stress that we live in a Christian world in which those who fail to act morally are ultimately punished. As human beings, we may plot this and attempt that, but if such acts are selfish and wicked, then we cannot hope to prosper by them in the long term. Yet Lady Audley's secret also shows how opportunistic sinners can manipulate circumstances to falsely imply that fate has made an act of evil destruction inevitable. In Volume 3, Chapter 1, The Red Light in the Sky, Phoebe's words on screen show that she felt it was fated for the Castle Inn to go up in flames one day. The building is all tumble-down woodwork and rotten rafters. Her husband is a careless drunkard, and no insurer will go near it due to its potential to burn down, and that she had been feeling uneasy about it that very evening. Yet the reality is that Lady Audley has set fire to lace by a mirror in Phoebe's bedroom, knowing full well how quickly the fire is likely to spread throughout the whole building. Perhaps it was fate for the building to burn down at some point, but here it is caused by malignant evil, tinged with the convenience of madness, which in time must be promised by God's hand, or within earth, a brief remaining lifelong imprisonment within the living grave of the Maison de Santé in Ville-Brumeuse.
In this video, I have aimed to give insight into the theme of madness and have argued that the novel suggests that being susceptible to madness is part of the human condition, that throwaway remarks about madness can be used to suggest eccentricity rather than full-blown mental idiocy, and that sustaining threats about other people's supposed madness could potentially have devastating consequences. I have looked at the presentation of women, exploring the huge problems in the courtship system, the unhelpful hero-worshipping of beauty, and the potentially destructive consequences, and the effects of women relying so much on marriage for something approaching a fulfilling, solvent existence. Finally, I have delved into the theme of fate, noting how Robert Audley is propelled to seek out justice by a strange outer compulsion, and how Braddon presents a world in which fate and the good Lord does not allow wickedness to prosper in the long term. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare A-Level Pre-U revision guide to Mary Elizabeth Braddon's Lady Audley's Secret. Many thanks for watching.